So here's a little sneaky peek. I'm gonna tell you something that may shock you. I don't know, it's pretty good. You're getting close to the end of the row and you're just like super nervous. Did I mess up? You know, have I got off a stitch or not? And when you get to the end of the row, you're so shocked if it actually ends on the right stitch. Like, whoa, I did that right. I can never believe it. I can never believe it when I finish a row and I ended on the right stitch. Wow. One thing I am working on is the Alpenglow. My Alpenglow slip. Just count me out. Wow, it is really hard to tell. You're not just very gently, slowly, centimeter by centimeter, sticking your hand in. Okay, back to knitting. Hello, and welcome to the Young Folk Knits podcast. This is the Colorwork episode. Hello y'all, and welcome to the Young Folk Knits podcast. My name is Casey and I am the maker here at Young Folk Knits. If you're a returning viewer, then thank you for coming back and hanging out with me again. If you are a new viewer, then you are very welcome. This is a podcast where I chat mainly about knitting. Sometimes I talk about my other hobbies, which are too numerous to mention. And I also chat a bit about living in Arkansas on a small farm in the foothills of the Ozarks. So last night I put up a question box in my Instagram stories and I just said I'd really like to talk about colorwork, and if you had any topics on the topic, if you had anything specifically about colorwork, thoughts on it, questions about it, ideas about it, to drop them in the box below. And apparently colorwork is a hot topic because y'all gave me a lot of talking points. Now I did just put it up last night, so if there are more that come in and I miss them, then I will add them onto a future episode. But as of right now, there's already quite a few pages of responses, so I thought it would be a lot of fun to just jump right in and start talking about all things colorwork. I have been knitting and dreaming of fall. I am so ready for fall. I have such a list of things that I want to make. One thing I am working on is the Alpenglow. One thing I am working on though is the Alpenglow sweater, which is a circular yoke colorwork pattern by Andrea Mowry, or Drea Renee Knits. And this is her Rhinebeck sweater for this year. So she did the pattern, which she does every year, with magpie fiber yarns and spin cycle yarns. However, by the time I decided to do this sweater, you couldn't find the magpie fiber yarns if your life depended on it. So I am using some sport weight yarn that I did have, and then I had to order extra balls in this one. I had previously bought quite a bit of the Quince & Co. Chickadee sport weight yarn, which I really liked the feel of. And so I had like 2 balls in many colors that I was gonna make socks with, and I never did. So I've made a tie out of some of those colors, and I have plans to make a sweater for my daughter. So I'm going to knit on my Alpenglow sweater while we chat a little bit about some of the different topics that y'all left for me. There were so many of these questions, so let me read this. I want to get into colorwork, but I don't know where to start. Just pick and run with it? How do you learn to do complicated colorwork? I don't know where to start. I'm eager to try colorwork for the first time. What tips do you have for a first timer? So there's a lot of different questions like that. So let me start off with talking about a colorwork pattern. So if you've never done colorwork before, but you would like to try one for the first time, then I would suggest starting with a 2-color colorwork pattern, not a 3-color colorwork pattern. And definitely you would want to choose one that only had 2 colors per row. So let's say you did decide to do a colorwork pattern that had more than 1 color in it. At the very least, make sure that it only has 2 colors per row. That's going to be so much easier to manage than if you're trying to juggle 3 balls of yarn in 1 row. I personally don't enjoy doing 3-color colorwork. I will do it if it's a pattern that I absolutely love and it's just for a few rows. But if it's a whole sweater in 3-color colorwork per row, just count me out. So I would pick a pattern that only has 2 colors, only 2 colors per row, and only has a few stitches between each color so that you don't have to even worry or think about catching floats. So one pattern that I think is really good is by Jessica McDonald, or Jessica M Knits on Instagram, and it's called the Blizzard Sweater. It's a 2-color colorwork pattern, so you could really practice with that, and it doesn't have long floats in it, which to me is key. She also has a lot of great YouTube videos and blog posts all about how to do the colorwork, and I think she even talks specifically about that sweater, so I think that's a great option. If you don't want to dive into a sweater, I think a hat is an absolutely spectacular idea. So there's lots of hat patterns that have just a couple colors and no long floats, so you can really practice on a smaller project. And that's really what I would recommend. I'm gonna put a couple of different pattern suggestions in the description box below, so you can check those out. The first colorwork I ever did was in a hat. It was just a very basic Fair Isle pattern. Like 1 row, you would knit your contrast color, then you would knit 3, and then you would knit your contrast color. No catching of floats, just those 2 colors. Then the next row or 2 rows, you would only knit your main color. Then on the next row, you would kind of scoot your contrast color over as to where it would start. So at the beginning of your row, you would, for instance, knit 2 of your main color, knit 1 of your contrast color, and then, you know, back to your knit 3, knit 1 Fair Isle pattern. Very simple. I think that is an absolutely excellent place to start. And I learned a lot of things when knitting that hat. For instance, color dominance matters. So when you're doing stranded knitting colorwork, one of the yarns or one of the colors is going to appear a little bit more dominant than the other color. So the reason behind that is because one of the strands of yarn is actually traveling a little bit further than the other yarn, if that makes sense. So it's a little bit tighter and it makes it recede or pull back more than the other yarn. That is not your dominant yarn. The one that is pushed forward, that is going to be your dominant yarn color. So the key to colorwork knitting and yarn dominance is to always make sure that the same color stays either the dominant or the not dominant color. If you're switching back and forth constantly, you're gonna have no pattern at all. It just absolutely will not look right. So for instance, in this piece that I'm knitting right here, this pink is not my dominant color. It's my background color. This is gonna be my dominant color in this sweater. So to maintain your dominant color, that yarn always needs to be held on the left side. So if you knit continental or with 1 yarn in each hand, then your dominant color is always gonna be on this side, in your left hand. Your non-dominant color will be over here. So that leads me to the next question that I got, which is how do you manage your strands if you can't knit continental? So I'm gonna take that as how would you manage your strands if you can't knit continental and hold 1 in each hand? So I do that a lot. I do like to knit with 1 hand continental and the other hand throwing, or English style. So 1 hand picking, 1 hand throwing. But sometimes I don't. Sometimes I'll just drop my yarn and pick up my other one. And when I do that, the yarn that I drop, that's gonna go down, that is my dominant strand. And my yarn, my main color, that is my non-dominant strand or my background color, I will hold it and then I will drop it towards me so that it goes over my needle and back towards me. And then I will pick up my dominant strand and knit and then put it back down. So I'll just show you my floats here. So you can see by looking at the floats that one of the yarns is actually running under the other yarn. The main thing is to stick with one or the other. My spin cycle is my dominant color, so I will always have it in either my left hand or falling down on this side. Haven't got to finish drinking my tea this morning. So another slight obsession I have is with tumblers. I have way too many of them. I love them. I can't resist them if they're cute. So I do have a couple of Yetis, but this is the Ozark Trail brand, which is from Walmart, and it's like half the price of a Yeti. And I'll just tell you, it may hold ice longer than a Yeti. I don't know. It's pretty good. Half the price. My husband says that we are cup poor because we spend all our money on tumblers, which by the way is not true. But yes, I do love a cute insulated cup. It's a weakness. Okay, anyway, moving on. I will link a video in the description about color dominance that will explain it better than I can. Back to knitting. So another topic that was mentioned multiple times was about floats. So for instance, floats, to catch or not, and how many stitches is too many. How to catch floats, keep tension so it doesn't look miserable. I'm gonna throw this one in there too. Top tips for tensioning, please. It's so easy to knit color work too tightly. How do you know just how long a float needs to be so the fabric has enough flexibility? Okay, this is a big one. So a lot of times I don't know who they is, but they say that you should catch your floats every inch or every 5 to 7 stitches. So I don't usually catch mine every 5 stitches. I'm gonna tell you something that may shock you. I was watching Jessica McDonald again. She's like my guru. She explains things really well. She has a video on Colorwork and she gave me permission to not catch my floats at all. So a lot of times I just don't catch my floats. For sure, if it's 7 or less, I absolutely do not catch my floats. This sweater that I'm making, the longest float is 7 stitches and I didn't catch any of them. And I'll show you again what it looks like. I think it looks fine. If it's like 10 or 15 stitches, then yeah. But that's more on the rare side. Most of the time it's gonna be less than that. The reason you would want to catch your floats is so that it doesn't get snagged and pull it and totally mess your tension up in your stitches. So for instance, you're knitting a mitten and you're going to be sticking your finger in and you're not paying attention and you're not just very gently, slowly, centimeter by centimeter sticking your hand in. But a lot of times when you put a mitten on, you put it on, you kind of slide it on your hand like that. So your finger could snag a float and pull it. Or socks, the same thing. Another thing, sleeves on a sweater. Those are all possibilities. So you could be very careful every single time and never wear a ring. Or you could catch your floats if it's super long. I would say this. I would give it a go of not catching your floats, especially on the body of a sweater, a cowl, a hat, things like that. I just wouldn't worry with it. I think that those things would absolutely be fine. Now we're jumping to that other question as well, which I think is sort of part of the floats. I'm a very loose knitter, but I have consciously made it where when I knit color work, I now have muscle memory to knit it very loosely. And the way I do that is by knitting a few stitches, and then when I'm picking up my next color, I will put my needle in to knit it, and then I'll pull and spread out my stitches. And that's gonna keep it from getting too tight. I'm constantly doing that. With every few stitches, I'm pulling it, I'm pulling it, I'm pulling it apart. And that keeps it very loose. So if your sweater, for instance, is all bunched up on a 16-inch circular and your knitting looks like this, it's all scrunched up. Wow, it is really hard to tell what your tension looks like. So then you switch to a bigger needle and suddenly your sweater's puckered and all like that because you didn't know that you were knitting it tightly to fit it on a 16-inch circular. So I do think having needles, or cables I should say, having cables big enough to be able to spread your work out at least in the section you're working on. So yeah, it's scrunched up over here, but over here I'm able to completely spread it out where I'm working. I think that's important. You need to be able to see your fabric and see that it's not bunched up and puckered. That makes a big difference for me because otherwise sometimes I might forget what I'm doing and forget that it needs to be pulled apart. But yeah, it's just muscle memory now. You know, I'll be knitting and then every few stitches my hand just kind of does that. So practice for a while you're knitting it, and then it just sort of becomes second nature. And that's really gonna help with your tension. Keep it spread out. And then whenever you pick up your contrast color, don't pull it tight. Just, you know, loosely pick it up and pull your stitches apart. Those are my main things for knitting. Now, because I do that constantly, I find that in a big circular project like a sweater, I do not have to go up a needle size for Colorwork. Sometimes that is recommended to go up like a size or a half size for the Colorwork section of a project. Now, I will show you an instance where I did do that, and that is for socks. So here's a little sneaky peek that I haven't shown anywhere of some socks that I have been designing. These are sweet little clementines and some little white flowers. Clementine oranges are like one of my absolute favorite designs of decor, and I just love them in general. I think they're so fun and so cute and so tasty. This is some yarn, fingering weight yarn I had in my stash. It's not really sock yarn, and I just wanted to knit it up to see what I thought about the pattern, and I am now reworking it in some different yarn. But yes, this is a pattern that I'm hoping to release at some point, and so you might keep your eyes open for that. But because it was small circumference and I was using 3 different colors at a time on some of the rows, I did have to go up a half size for the small circumference. So here's my floats. Whoops. So here's my floats. I'll show you. And that looks pretty good to me, but that is up a size on my Colorwork. The small circumference with Colorwork, like socks where I'm using more than 2 colors, that is a time that I do sometimes have to go up on needle size. So another question that I got quite a few times was about choosing colors or your color palette. And that is a little bit of a tough one. Sorry. My center pull ball, which I do not pull from the center, I pull from the outside, is having a bit of yarn vomit and got all knotted up with the yarn I was pulling from the outside. So let me get that untangled. So that can be a little bit of a tough one because a lot of times I stick to certain colors that I know I like and I know I like together. But there's a few things that I think are really helpful. So first of all, just getting different colors and putting them next to each other. Do they look good? Do you like them together or not? And if you are ordering online and you can't do it in person, take screenshots of the yarn and then put them in the picture next to each other and see if you like them together. Another option is to look at other people's projects. So you can get on Instagram and look at the hashtag for a project. You can get on Ravelry and look at all the projects that people have posted on there. And scroll through a lot of different projects and look, what colors do you like together? What colors do you not like together? You sort of get a feel for what looks good and what doesn't. And sometimes it's a very personal decision, personal preference. You also have two different choices with Colorwork. You've got high contrast and low contrast. Sometimes I like high contrast, sometimes I like low contrast. So for instance, at the top of my sweater, this, and these three, those are pretty high contrast. I mean, you can, from a distance, you can see those three colors and the pattern and the design. They pop. They are very different from each other. But when I get into my spin cycle here and the pattern that's going to go all the way throughout the sweater, I've chosen to go low contrast. So when you get up close, you can definitely see the pattern. But when you're from a distance, you might not even be able to see that there's a pattern there. And I like that. So I'm using both high contrast and low contrast in the same sweater. A lot of times I go with low contrast, but you have to be willing to maybe lose some of your distinct pattern. Sometimes it can become a little fuzzy if it's too low contrast. So I wouldn't generally recommend low contrast. That's a choice that I've made because I like it. But for the most part, Colorwork is going to be done in high contrast colors like these. Now, how do you choose those? One thing I like to do is I will literally take inspiration from everywhere. Is there a rug that I really like? Is there a book? Is there a piece of clothing that I've bought? A dress? A coffee cup? Some flowers? A painting? Anything. If you see something and you think, wow, I really like that. What do you like about it? Do you like the colors in it? Well, what are the colors? What colors do you like? Take a picture of it and use it in one of your Colorwork projects. You can literally get inspiration from anywhere. I mean, I love the green and brown of my plants and their terracotta planters. I love project bags. Usually project bag makers are really good at putting colors together, so great source of inspiration there. I also got a lot of comments about charts. So I know that charts can seem really intimidating, but I love a chart. Once you learn how to use it, they are so nice. It's almost like your brain can more quickly process what you're doing. So you do need to learn how to read a chart. I'm not going to go through and talk about step for step how to read a chart. I will link a video on how to do that. There's some great resources. But some things that I do think help so much with a chart are these babies, which is a highlighter or a pen. So I've got my pink pen and my highlighter. But one thing that I think is really nice to be able to highlight a row when you have finished it, and that way you can still see the pattern. You haven't marked it out where you can't see it, but you know you've completed that, and it's really quick and easy to see where you're at. Another thing is that you can use a pen to mark off each row. So those are so helpful when reading a chart. Make sure that you print it off in high enough contrast colors, you know, like gray, black, and white. Make sure that they are contrast enough so that you can actually easily tell what is what on your chart. That makes a big difference too. Just try it. Start with a hat. Watch a video on how to read a chart and choose a 2-color Colorwork pattern with some floats that aren't too long that you could practice on, and you may just absolutely fall in love. When I'm knitting something that has a lot of stitches on it and it's either Colorwork or lace, am I the only one that you're getting close to the end of the row and you're just like super nervous did I mess up? You know, have I got off a stitch or not? And when you get to the end of the row, you're so shocked if it actually ends on the right stitch. Like, whoa, I did that right. I can never believe it. I can never believe it when I finish a row and I ended on the right stitch. Like, wow. Am I the only one? Okay, one other thing I want to talk about is when you're doing color work and you got balls going everywhere. Right now, I've got 2 balls of yarn. This is my main color, my background color, my dominant color. So, since we already talked about the dominant color needs to be to the left, where I usually let it drop down, and my main color I hold to the right, or I have it pulled up and over my work if I'm not using it. So I always keep this yarn ball on my right side, and I keep this yarn ball on my left side. And if you have 3 balls, so you're knitting color work with, let's say, 3 colors at once, something you could do is put one on your left side, one in your lap, one on your right side if you're on a couch. Another really great option is to knit at a table and lay them all out in front of you. So 1 ball to the left, 1 center, and 1 right, and you're keeping them separated. Okay, let me show you how I catch floats. So when I am catching floats, it is so much easier if you're able to hold one in each hand, but it can totally be done without doing that. But you do this little flick twist thing and it's so fast and it keeps your yarn from getting tangled. Okay, so I've got my non-dominant color in my right hand and my dominant color in my left hand. So depending on what my hands want to do in the moment, I will either throw or flick my non-dominant color, and then whenever it comes time for my dominant color, I will pick that. And it's being held in my left hand. So insert, bring your yarn forward, wrap it around, unwrap that first yarn, pull it through, and then knit your next stitch. And there you go. All right, one more time. All right, let me knit a few. And then do it one more time. So it's actually going to catch it on the next stitch. Not the stitch that you've done that on, but on the next stitch. So the last topic I want to chat about, I got a few different questions on, which involves different kinds of colorwork knitting. Your favorite colorwork technique: stranded, mosaic, intarsia, etc. Another one was, what colorwork techniques do you want to try? I think that my favorite colorwork technique is stranded colorwork knitting. I just like it a little bit better because I'm very used to it. I have done intarsia multiple times and I enjoyed it just fine, as long as there's not too many balls. I do not like it when I have a lot of different colors. I just don't enjoy it. So I've made a couple of different stuffed animals. One is a fox, which I'll show you. And intarsia, I actually enjoy if there's only 2 colors. For instance, you actually do intarsia on the Jessie May sweater, the Sheer V, which I did not too long ago, and that was pretty enjoyable. And then another one that I started and have not finished, but I am now that I'm done with some test knits, I'm going to pick this back up. This is my pressed flower shawl. So this is mosaic knitting. And mosaic knitting, really all it is just slipping stitches. And I think it gives a really cool and very unique look to it. So definitely like that. I think it's very fun, but it does make a very thick fabric. But yes, I still like it a lot. I think overall though, I'm just the most used to stranded colorwork knitting, and I probably like that the best. I like the different patterns you can create, but they're all really fun, and I love doing all of them here and there just for something different. A little excitement in there now and again. Spin Cycle and other color changing yarns like Cascade Heritage, the Zour Balls, if I'm saying that right, and what else? I've seen like Noro silk yarn. There's actually quite a few different color changing yarns. They make colorwork easy because it's almost like you're using a lot of different colors and you're really only using one ball of yarn. So this is one of my absolute favorites. This is Mississippi Marsala. This is what I'm using in my Alpenglow, and you can tell it's gonna be really low contrast. And that's what I wanted. I wanted to go for that specifically. This pattern has colorwork and mosaic knitting because you're gonna be slipping stitches in the main body, which I think is pretty cool. So this is like a mishmash of multiple things. The only thing it doesn't have is intarsia. So wow, you can try out everything on this sweater. I am still heavily in the midst of Operation Make This Yoke Fit. So I'm still trying to figure out what all I want to do to modify this. I did go down a size from what I normally knit, and I think it's a more accurate size for me anyway, so that might help a lot with this section here. But I am very excited for this sweater. I think it's gonna be a lot of fun. It's not really my normal colors that I've knit with in the past, but I think we all need a little bit of fun in our wardrobe. So I know that there are some very experienced knitters in this knitting community, and I would absolutely love it. A new knitter, experienced knitter, questions, pop them in the comments. And one of the things I love about the knitting community is that we all love to talk about knitting. So I think everyone is usually so helpful and has a lot of great ideas. So put your thoughts, tips, pointers, questions, any of that about colorwork knitting in the comments, and I think it'd be really awesome. We could all help each other out. If you see a question in the comments and you think you have a good idea for it, please, I would love it if you would respond or just tell us your tips and tricks for colorwork knitting. I'm always on the lookout for how to improve my knitting. So I did want to talk a little bit about one more question, and that was about mixing yarn weights. So I think that's absolutely okay. I think the main thing you need to do is swatch. So there's actually quite a few patterns that have been written with differing yarn weights. A lot of Andrea Mowry sweaters use different yarn weights, and I have actually been wanting to make a sweater that is a sports weight sweater, and it calls for 2 different colors. It's a colorwork design, but I'm thinking of using a sport weight for the main color and then a fingering weight for the contrast color. So I think that's totally fine. I would just recommend swatching. What are y'all's thoughts on it? If you've done that before, have you had good success with mixing yarn weights? I'd love to hear about that. Main thing is you want to swatch and see what your gauge looks like and see what the fabric looks like. You would definitely want to make sure that you're happy with the fabric it creates. So I know this video was a little bit different than my normal, but I thought it would be interesting to really go into more depth on just one subject. On the next episode, I have got quite a few different projects that I'm excited to chat about, so stay tuned for that. And also, I just want to say thank you so much for being here. If you enjoyed this video, then please subscribe, comment, and like. It helps my channel out so much. And until we meet again, happy knitting, y'all.